My name is Haley Grant. I'm 31 years old, and the moment that shattered everything in my family started with one notification vibrating across a silent library table. I wasn't doing anything dramatic, just reviewing financial documents for work, trying to stay focused, when my phone lit up with a preview from our wedding group chat. I glanced at it casually at first, thinking it would be another update about color palettes or table placements. Instead, I saw a single sentence that sliced straight through me. "You're not invited to the wedding. Goodbye, loser." For a second, I wasn't sure if I'd read it correctly. Then the screen flickered again as someone reacted to the message. A thumbs up. From my father. That was the moment something inside me went still. Not broken. Still. Clean, sharp clarity washing over everything that confusion used to blur. They didn't explain. They didn't hesitate. They didn't even check if I'd seen it. They just carried on. The chat kept rolling with jokes, little bursts of excitement about the rehearsal dinner, laughing emojis stacked on top of each other like nothing had happened, like I had never been part of any of it in the first place. I stared at their messages, at their casual cruelty, at the total confidence that I would stay silent, stay useful, stay paying. So I typed one sentence back. Perfect. Then I'll remove my payments from the account. Not one of them took it seriously. Not at first. But the thing they forgot, the thing I had never reminded them of, is that every contract, every deposit, every vendor booking, every signature tied to that wedding carried my name. An hour later, the panic began. Before I reveal what happened next, and why my father's reaction changed everything, tell me, what time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? I'd love to see how far this story reaches. A quiet shift happened the moment I stepped through my front door that evening. The library's stillness had followed me home, settling over the apartment like a veil that made everything feel sharper, more deliberate. I set my bag down, opened my laptop, and stared at the blank screen for a moment. Not because I didn't know what to do next, but because I finally understood how long I had let certain patterns go unquestioned. People assume family dynamics fall apart in one dramatic moment, but that's rarely how it works. More often, it's years of small expectations stacked on top of each other until the weight becomes something no one notices anymore, except the person holding it. In my family, that person was always me. I grew up being called the responsible one, the daughter who didn't push boundaries, didn't ask for much, didn't need the same level of attention. My sister needed help. I was told I was good on my own. When a bill was overdue, my name came up. When a repair was too expensive, the suggestion felt casual. "Haley, can you take care of this until next month?" That next month usually stretched into years. It didn't start maliciously. At first, I helped because it felt natural, because that's what you do when you love people. But the requests kept expanding, creeping into more parts of my life. I covered utilities once, then twice, then it became normal. I helped with late fees on a credit card. I paid for a car insurance renewal when things were tight. A small loan turned into a pattern. Every time, I heard the same justification. "You're steady, Haley. You always land on your feet. Steady, responsible, the one who could afford to bend." That's how I ended up being the person who coordinated every vendor for the wedding. My sister wanted a beautiful venue but didn't have the credit score to secure the reservation, so I stepped in. The catering company needed a valid card for the deposit, and everyone looked at me. The florist required a signed agreement, and once again, the pen landed in my hand before I fully registered what I was agreeing to. My parents said they would reimburse me once everything settled. My sister insisted she and her fiancé would pay me back after the gifts. It didn't matter which excuse they used. The underlying message was always the same. Haley will handle it. Haley always handles it. What I never said out loud, mostly because no one would have heard it, was that I wasn't as unbreakable as they assumed. I had my own expenses, my own future, my own life to plan. But every time I tried to draw a boundary, the conversation spun into guilt or dismissal. My needs were negotiable, theirs were not. Staring at my laptop now, I could see those years more clearly than ever. Every invoice I'd scanned and saved, every contract I'd signed, every payment confirmation neatly filed into organized folders because that was my role. The reliable daughter, the financial buffer, the safety net no one acknowledged but everyone depended on. For the first time, though, I didn't feel resentment rising in my chest. What I felt was awareness, cold, steady, and overdue. I clicked open the folder labeled Wedding Documents. Pages filled the screen. Agreements from the venue, catering details, floral arrangements, timelines, itemized deposits. My signature sat at the bottom of every document, a quiet testimony to a version of myself who kept believing things would eventually balance out. But balance only exists when all sides participate. I leaned back in my chair, letting the glow of the monitor wash over the room. There was nothing impulsive about what I needed to do. No anger clouding my judgment, no vindictiveness pushing me forward. Just a long, overdue shift in gravity, an understanding that I no longer had to hold up every piece of a structure that had never once supported me in return. People like to say that boundaries ruin families. I think failing to set them does far more damage. My hand moved almost automatically to the trackpad as I prepared to take the next step. Each document confirmed the same truth. I wasn't powerless here. I had simply forgotten how much control I had ceded over time. That clarity felt unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. A soft shift in the air marked the next moment, the kind that happens when you know something in your life is about to move in a direction you can't undo. I loosened my shoulders, opened a new tab on my laptop, and reached for the first contract in the stack. The venue's number was already saved in my contacts. I had spoken with them more than anyone else involved, coordinating dates, confirming layouts, adjusting small details whenever my sister changed her mind. Calling them now felt strangely effortless, as if the weight of every previous conversation had finally detached itself. The manager answered with the same warm professionalism he always used. I matched his tone, stating clearly that I needed to cancel the reservation tied to my name. He pulled up the account, paused, and confirmed politely that the booking was indeed under my information. His voice remained neutral, but there was a carefulness to it, an understanding that this kind of request often came with complications. There were no complications here. Not for me, anyway. He explained the cancellation terms, mentioned the deposit, and outlined what would happen next. I agreed to everything without hesitation. The process took less than 5 minutes, yet the shift it created felt far larger than the time it occupied. When I hung up, my apartment seemed quieter than before. Next came the catering company. I forwarded the confirmation email, signed the cancellation form, and acknowledged the non-refundable portion. The florist followed. A short phone call, a brief verification, a cancellation recorded in their system. The photographer required a longer conversation, mostly because she remembered every detail of the vision my sister had insisted upon. Her voice softened when she realized I wasn't calling to adjust the schedule, but to erase it entirely. Not one of these cancellations required my sister's approval. Not one required my parents' signatures. Every vendor recognized me as the sole client, the point of contact, the decision maker, the person financially responsible, the person with authority. It was surreal how simple it all was. As I worked through each account, emails stacked neatly in my inbox, confirmation notices, voided contracts, refund breakdowns. I kept my pace steady, moving from one task to the next without stopping long enough for second thoughts to take root. The silence of the apartment wasn't empty. It was clarity. My laptop chimed again when the dress boutique responded. They were polite but cautious. The deposit was under my card, the fitting had been scheduled using my information, and the balance remained unsigned. Their message ended with a standard line. Alterations would not proceed without authorization from the paying party. I didn't authorize anything. A small part of me wondered how long it would take for my family to notice the shift. Not the financial one, they'd feel that soon enough, but the emotional one, the shift in the dynamic they had grown so accustomed to. They had always assumed my silence came from passivity, not from choice. The quiet around me began to feel full, a space expanding with every decision I made. It wasn't until the next morning that movement stirred on their end. I was pouring coffee when my phone lit up with a message from my sister. The preview alone carried tension, but I didn't open it yet. More notifications followed, one after another, stacking in a rhythm that suggested urgency rather than curiosity. I glanced at the screen briefly, just long enough to recognize the sender, but not long enough to read the content. I wasn't ready to let their panic intrude on the focus I had built. Another alert appeared, then another. My mom, my dad, my sister again. The rapid burst of messages pulsed across the screen like a storm forming in the distance. They weren't used to unanswered calls. They weren't used to silence from me at all. Their urgency didn't move me. I set the phone down, letting the notifications pile up without interference. The world outside my apartment carried on. Traffic humming faintly, a dog barking somewhere down the street, footsteps from a neighbor heading down the hall. Everything continued as if nothing monumental had happened. Inside, everything had. I returned to my laptop, reviewed the last round of confirmations, and closed each window one by one. My signature sat on every document, and my decisions were final. There was no need for anyone else's involvement. No one could undo what I had done. By early afternoon, the atmosphere around me carried a different kind of tension, the kind that settles in when someone realizes control is slipping through their fingers. My phone vibrated again, not with uncertainty this time, but with insistence. I picked it up, saw my dad's name on the screen, and knew immediately that whatever patience he had been clinging to earlier had evaporated. The first message came through with a clipped sharpness, as if he'd typed it without stopping to breathe. Enough. Fix this now. A second followed almost immediately. Your sister didn't mean what she said. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be. Then a third. You're overreacting. Call them back. There was an authority in his tone he'd always assumed he had. The expectation that I would fold, because folding had once been easier than fighting. The assumption that I would prioritize their comfort over my own boundaries. It was so familiar that for a moment, I simply stared at the screen, recognizing the old pattern in its most concentrated form. Not long after, my mom joined in. Her messages were gentler on the surface, but they carried a different weight, softened pressure masquerading as concern. Your sister is stressed. Emotions are high. Be reasonable. We can sort this out if you calm down, sweetheart. Calm down. Reasonable. Words designed to redirect responsibility back onto me, the same way they always had. Neither of them asked what had led to my decision. Neither acknowledged the months of planning, the expenses, or the way I had been treated. They simply wanted the fallout cleaned up. Then came my sister's message. Short, calculated, sharp around the edges. If you don't put everything back, I'll tell everyone what you did to Ryan. It wasn't the threat itself that struck me. It was the desperation beneath it. She didn't specify anything. She didn't explain. She didn't even verify whether the accusation made sense. She just reached for something she thought might scare me into submission. Something vague enough to sound damaging, but empty enough to reveal how little she actually had to use against me. I didn't respond. The notifications kept coming, rolling in without pause, but I silenced my phone and walked away from it. Their urgency wasn't mine to hold. It wasn't until my laptop chimed that I returned to the desk. A new email sat at the top of my inbox, an automated message from the venue's fraud prevention department. The subject line alone sent a cold clarity through me. Request verification, attempted account access. I opened it. Someone had called pretending to be me. They had used my full name, attempted to reverse a cancellation, and insisted I had changed my mind. When the staff member asked for identity verification, the caller hung up. There was no mystery about who it was. It made a strange kind of sense. When direct pressure failed, the next step was to bypass me entirely. My dad had always believed that obstacles were things to remove, not consider. If a boundary existed, he pushed past it. If a system required proof, he found ways around it. The idea that vendors saw me, not him, as the primary authority must have been intolerable. But what struck me most wasn't anger. It was recognition. A clean, precise understanding of how far he was willing to go to maintain control. Another email arrived, this time from a different vendor. The tone was polite, but firm. They needed confirmation that I had authorized further changes to the account. No change had been authorized. No one had been given permission. The pattern was unmistakable. As I reviewed the messages, I felt my breathing steady instead of accelerate. There was no chaos inside me, no swirl of confusion or guilt. Their actions didn't shake me. They clarified the situation with a sharpness I hadn't expected. Their panic wasn't a sign of my wrongdoing. It was a reaction to losing access to something they believed they owned. Even her fiancé, who had stayed quiet longer than the rest, finally surfaced. His message was hesitant, almost reluctant, carrying a strain between loyalty and discomfort. He didn't accuse me of anything, but the unease in his words made it clear that he had begun hearing fragments of conversations he wasn't sure how to process. I read everything once, then closed the messages without replying. None of it required an immediate response. None of it changed the decisions already made. The day moved forward around me, steady and unbothered, as if reminding me that not every storm demanded participation. Morning arrived with a strange stillness, the kind that settles right before something gives way. I had barely stepped into my kitchen when my phone vibrated again, this time with a call from a relative I rarely heard from. I let it ring out. A moment later, a voicemail followed, then another message appeared on my screen, this one from my aunt. That alone told me the ripple effect had finally reached beyond my immediate family. I opened her message, reading each word slowly. She didn't dance around the subject. She never had. She wrote that my sister had been telling everyone I had a meltdown and that I had sabotaged the wedding out of jealousy. The tone in her message wasn't accusatory. It was weary, disappointed by what she'd been told, but still giving me room to speak for myself. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I set the phone down and let the information settle. Their story had started spreading faster than the truth ever could. Another message came minutes later, this time from a cousin whose updates usually consisted of holiday photos and recipe swaps. She asked if it was true that the wedding plans had fallen apart, that vendors were backing out, and that my sister was now scrambling for alternatives. There was a note of disbelief in her words, as if she hadn't expected the situation to unravel this dramatically. I hadn't either, but I also wasn't surprised. Throughout the day, more updates filtered in, from relatives, acquaintances, even distant family friends who somehow caught pieces of the chaos. The fragments all aligned into a clear picture. The wedding had tipped into full crisis. According to one message, the outdoor setup my sister tried to assemble had been dismantled by the city after a neighbor reported the structure. No permit had been filed, no safety guidelines followed. Another update came about the catering company refusing to reinstate service, citing trust concerns after someone attempted to modify my account without authorization. The florist had declined to move forward as well, stating that the financial point of contact was unclear. Everything my family tried to salvage slipped through their hands. It wasn't vindication I felt. It was distance. A widening gap between the fallout and the person I used to be in these situations. These were the kinds of emergencies I had always been expected to fix. I would have stepped in, reorganized everything, smoothed the edges of their chaos, and found solutions no one else wanted to bother with. That used to be my role. But I didn't feel any instinct to intervene now. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mom. Her message carried a sharpness disguised as heartbreak, a blend of accusation and helplessness. She wrote that everything was falling apart, that my sister was devastated, that the family was embarrassed. She added that she didn't understand why I was choosing to be cruel. Cruel. The word hung in the air for a moment. I wasn't the one who had removed myself from the wedding. I wasn't the one who dismissed someone I relied on. I wasn't the one who used threats, manipulation, or identity misrepresentation. All I had done was stop funding a celebration I was no longer invited to attend. But in their eyes, withholding support was violence, upholding a boundary was betrayal, and protecting myself was cruelty. The next message came from my dad, shorter than usual, carrying none of the authority from the day before. His tone shifted into something that hovered between anger and desperation. He insisted the situation was fixable, that I was the only one making it difficult, that I needed to think about the bigger picture. The bigger picture had never included me. Not really. Another update arrived from a cousin shortly after. This one heavier than the rest. She wrote that my sister's fiancé had been visibly upset throughout the morning, muttering to friends about finally seeing how her family handles things. She added that tension was building between them, the kind that doesn't come from a single argument but from the accumulation of small realizations. Still, none of this made me feel triumphant. It just made everything clearer. Their choices were catching up to them, and for the first time, I wasn't cushioning the impact. By early evening, the flow of messages had slowed, replaced by a muted hum of silence, one that carried exhaustion rather than resolution. My phone sat on the table, the screen dark, notifications paused. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I remained still, letting the quiet settle into the space that existed between who I used to be and who I was becoming. Nothing in the world around me changed, but everything in the dynamic had. The hours that followed carried a quiet precision, as if every decision I made needed to land exactly where it belonged. I had no interest in reviewing the stream of messages piling up on my phone. Their urgency was no longer something I felt responsible for. Instead, I opened my laptop again, not to undo anything, but to make sure every thread tying me to this situation was finally cut. The first step was practical. I logged into my accounts and reviewed each bill I had been covering for far too long, subscriptions my family never reimbursed, utilities I had absorbed without argument, payments that had quietly become routine. One by one, I removed my card from every autopay. Electricity, internet, insurance renewals. The responsibilities they had pushed onto me faded from the screen with each confirmation prompt. None of these were dramatic gestures. They were overdue corrections. Next, I contacted my bank. I reported recent attempts to impersonate me and requested a security review on all linked accounts. The representative was calm and professional, walking me through added safeguards, new authentication measures, and alerts that would notify me immediately if anyone tried accessing my information again. Her tone never shifted, not even when I explained that the impersonation attempt came from someone in my own family. She simply typed, verified, secured. It was the kind of clarity I needed. From there, I placed a fraud alert on my credit report. It's a simple process, one that anyone in the US can initiate with a single submission, but its implications are significant. Any future credit checks would require additional verification. No one, under any circumstances, would be able to open accounts or make changes without my explicit consent. It was protection I should have put in place years ago. The notifications on my phone were still coming in, buzzing faintly from across the room. I didn't move to silence them this time. Let them arrive. Let the noise build. It no longer had a place in the decisions I was making. At some point in the afternoon, my mom called. When I didn't answer, she called again. Then she texted. Long, winding paragraphs about disappointment, about family unity, about how stressful the timing was. There was a plea tucked into the middle of it, a familiar tug designed to pull me back into the role I had outgrown. I read it once and closed the message without replying. My dad didn't bother with softness. His voice came through in a voicemail, each word controlled but edged with frustration. He talked about responsibility, about expectations, about how I was letting the family down. The irony of those words didn't escape me. He had always spoken about duty as though it flowed only in one direction, toward them. I deleted the voicemail. As the days stretched on, the distance between their panic and my clarity grew wider. I started packing, not out of impulse but out of recognition. I had been planning a move for months, hesitant to take the next step because of family obligations that were never reciprocated. Now, the hesitation was gone. I folded clothes into suitcases, sorted through drawers, and placed items into boxes with a calm I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't escape, it was alignment. Paperwork went into labeled folders. Essentials were set aside. A new set of apartment listings was already saved in my browser, all in cities where I could build a life defined by my choices rather than my obligations. I wasn't running away from them. I was simply stepping out of a role I had never agreed to play. Late in the evening, another message arrived. This one was shorter, sent by my sister. No accusations this time, no vague threats. Just a string of words that revealed how deeply the situation had slipped out of her control. Everything is falling apart. Please fix it. There was a time when that plea would have cracked something in me, a time when I would have dropped everything to make her life easier. But that time had ended the moment they decided I wasn't worth inviting. I didn't answer. Not because I wanted her to struggle, but because I finally understood that her struggles were not mine to carry. The weight she held belonged to the choices she made. The apartment around me felt lighter that night, as if the walls had expanded. I zipped the last suitcase, closed my laptop, and let the silence settle without resistance. Everything that needed to be done had been done. The morning unfolded with an unfamiliar lightness, the kind that comes when a decision has already settled into place long before the day begins. I moved through my apartment quietly, aware of the boxes stacked near the doorway, aware of the choices that had led me here. Choices that, for the first time, belonged entirely to me. The silence around me wasn't empty anymore. It felt earned. Later that afternoon, I checked the notifications on my phone, not out of urgency, but out of finality. The screen displayed a string of updates, each one reflecting a different angle of the unraveling I had stepped away from. Photos, brief posts, and muted announcements revealed that the wedding had happened after all, but not in the way anyone had once imagined. A plain room, a simple signature, and a quiet ceremony recorded with minimal enthusiasm. No grand venue, no carefully curated decor, no celebration that mirrored months of planning. I felt no satisfaction in seeing it, only clarity. The absence of my involvement had done nothing more than remove the scaffolding they had leaned on. Without it, everything settled into its natural state. They had built something unstable, and unstable things tend to fall under their own weight. Over the following weeks, distance shaped itself into routine. The messages from my family grew sporadic, shifting from demands to questions, then from questions to silence. I didn't block them. I simply stopped participating in conversations that were never truly conversations to begin with. Their disappointment didn't echo the way it once had. It had lost its shape, no longer able to reach me. Life began to move again in ways I hadn't expected. I settled into a new apartment with windows that overlooked a quiet street. I met neighbors who didn't know anything about my past. I developed habits that were entirely mine: morning walks, late-night reading, weekends spent in spaces where I wasn't defined by responsibility or expectation. The absence of pressure didn't feel strange, it felt overdue. One afternoon, while sorting through documents, I noticed an envelope tucked between folders. It contained receipts, contracts, and payment confirmations, physical reminders of the months I had carried more than anyone realized. I held each paper for a moment, recognizing the version of myself who had believed that generosity could hold a family together. That version had been hopeful, patient, willing to stretch beyond reason. But growth often requires letting go of old understandings. I placed the papers back into the envelope and stored it away, not out of bitterness, but out of acknowledgement. Every step I had taken, every boundary, every refusal, every moment of silence, had been a return to myself. Occasionally, updates filtered in through extended family. I heard that tensions lingered long after the wedding, that the financial strain had deepened fault lines that had existed quietly for years. I learned that relationships once presented as unshakable had begun to fracture under the weight of unspoken truths. None of it surprised me. Families built on denial often crack when they lose the person who holds everything together. But even with that knowledge, I didn't feel vindication. What I felt instead was distance, the healthy kind, the necessary kind. Living outside of their expectations allowed me to see the shape of my own life more clearly. I didn't need to justify my choices. I didn't need to repair what I hadn't broken. I didn't need to step back into a narrative that had never belonged to me. There was freedom in that realization. In quieter moments, I reflected on everything that had unfolded, not to relive it, but to understand it. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doorways. They allow you to choose what enters and what stays. For years, I had mistaken endurance for strength, believing that holding everything together was the only way to keep a family connected. But true strength sometimes lies in stepping back, in recognizing when a pattern is unhealthy, and in choosing a different path even when others call it betrayal. I don't know how they speak of me now. I don't know what version of the story they share, or whether they've rewritten the details to ease their discomfort. What I do know is that my life no longer bends around explanations. I exist outside the weight of their narratives, and that is enough. If there is a lesson in all of this, it is simple. You cannot save people from the consequences of the choices they make when those choices are built on entitlement. And you cannot lose yourself trying to be the foundation for others who never learned how to stand on their own. My story didn't end in reconciliation. It ended in clarity, quiet, steady, and honest. And sometimes that is the only ending you truly need. Before you go, tell me, what part of this story stayed with you the most? And where in the world are you watching from? I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel.